Hi, and welcome back to the McCall's Quilting Summer Garden Quilt-Along. This is our last segment, and you get to put on that big, beautiful outer border, and we'll just talk about quilting and finishing up the quilt. So I have that little part of the quilt that I can fit on a table laid out here for you. My inner border is sewn on, and I have the big border strips here ready to go. Now I want to talk to you about putting that big border strip on. I know in the beginning of the quilt-along, I talked to you about how to know what size to cut your border strips. I'm just going to go over that really quickly again because it's important. So what you're going to do, again, in the pattern, you're cutting like a 68-inch strip. It's not actually the length that you're going to be needing. These are 20-inch blocks, and then you have the 2-inch inner border on both sides. So it's actually going to be 64.5 inches if you sewed everything perfectly, okay? But you do your initial cut at 68, or that's why it's listed that way, so we know you have enough. Okay, so for you to know exactly how long you should cut the side strips, what you're going to do is measure raw edge to raw edge through the center of the quilt in the vertical, like that. You can do it in a couple of places if you want to, but you need to know what that measurement is. And if you're measuring just the sides, the actual edges, they can be very different measurements. If you sew the border on, sew on the strip and just trim it even, what can happen is you can have very different lengths of border strips doing it that way. Then when it goes to your machine quilter and she's trying to quilt it, she'll have it stretched, spread really flat and secured, and it will become very obvious that your quilt is not squared. And it can be, you can't quilt that in. She can't hide that extra fabric. So you want to make sure that your side borders and your top and bottom borders, that those are cut to the same length. So measure from raw edge to raw edge in the center vertically and cut your side strips to that measurement, okay? To cut the top and bottom strips, you do the same thing, but you do your measuring after the big side borders have been sewn on. So after you sew on those big side borders, measure through the middle of the quilt on the horizontal from raw edge to raw edges, and that's the length to cut your big borders. Okay, so now you have them cut to the right size. How do you make sure that you've got them sewn where you want them to be, that they're centered and just right? Okay, so what you're going to do, I'm just going to take this little strip here and show you. You fold it in half, like that. And when you do that, you're going to find the center point of your border. And so what I'm going to do, I folded it in half, and I'm just going to do a finger crease right there. Make sure I've got that nicely marked for myself. Okay? And remember when I talked about the center of a side, the center of the top bottom in this quilt, is going to be the middle of an edge block. So I'm just going to slide this down, move you out of the way, like this. Okay. This is the middle of my edge block. All right? And now I have just made that little finger crease, marking the center of my border strip. Okay, come here, baby. And what I'm going to do, here is that center right there. It's the middle of the edge block, comes right out to that point. And I'm going to make that crease of mine go right over the point like that. And I just pin that in place there. And then when I stretch my borders out to the sides, I'll pin the two corners and make sure that they're aligned just right. And then you can kind of ease in, or just gently, if you need to, just gently maybe add a little, just kind of pull on that a little bit so you get a little more length. You can do that too. That's when you would do that. So that's how you put on the big border strips. You finger press in the middle, get yourself a little mark, and then you align that with the middle of your edge strips. Okay, so once you have your big borders on, it's time to finish the quilt. And there are many ways to have a quilt quilted. You can do it yourself, quilting it by hand. You can do it yourself, quilting by machine. You can take it to somebody who will quilt it by hand, which might cost a little bit, but could be really worth it if you love the way that looks. And the most common way now that people finish quilts is they take their quilt top to a machine quilter. To find a good machine quilter, there are a couple different things you can do. One thing you can do is just word of mouth with your quilting friends. So if you belong to a guild, you can talk to your friends and say, you know, do you have a machine quilter you really like? What is she good at? That kind of thing. You can also ask at your local quilt store because they'll have a list of the machine quilters in your area. And then before you commit to taking your quilt top to a machine quilter, of course you call them, first of all, because you can't take it over there without calling them first. But you would call them first and ask them what they do best, what they like the most. Are they willing to do custom designs? Are they willing to do a different quilting design in each block? Or do they just do all over pantograms? What do they do best? What do they like doing and what won't they do? Some machine quilters won't use a certain type of batting. Some machine quilters won't allow a pieced backing. So you need to talk to the machine quilter you're thinking about using and find out if you guys are compatible, okay? And of course you're going to want to talk price, which is the usual thing, and it's priced by how many cents per square inch. If you have an all-over design, like the quilt here, this quilt has this all over, it's quite a lovely little sprightly floral design that's an all over. That can be very reasonable, just a few cents per square inch, and it looks wonderful. If you want something that's more custom, so let's say you would have, in our quilt here, maybe you would have a design that was just in this area, okay? Maybe you would have a special thing featured right in the middle of your star. You'd have a star here, and you'd have a flower here and a small flower here. That kind of custom work costs a lot more because it's a lot more work for the machine quilter. You know, that's pretty straightforward. And another thing, you can have a change in thread colors if you want to. You could put a green flower here, and you could put maybe a pink little feather there, and you could use white threads in the pink border. It's all up to you and your machine quilter what she's willing to do, what you're willing to pay for. So it will cost if you want to do thread changes, but some quilts are so marvelous because they have thread changes. So talk to your quilter, and when you go to visit her, she will have patterns for you to look at of the various patterns that she has available, and you can pick one, and many quilters can change the size to what you want of a specific motif. So it's really fun to work with a machine quilter and pick out what you want to do. So the other couple things is batting. There are cotton battings or bats. There is polyester cotton blends. There's bamboo. There's silk. And each of these things has a different quality to it, a different feel, a different expense, for instance. And for instance, polyester and cotton is their polyester batting. That's the cheapest, but it's more spongy. So you would want, you'd have to be comfortable with that sort of a little more spongy feel to the quilt. And it doesn't shrink up at all. Now, if you are a person who goes ahead and you make your quilt top, but without pre-washing the fabric, when that goes into the washing machine and the dryer, your fabric's going to shrink up, which is really quite lovely. That polyester batting will not. And unlike that lovely old-timey feel when the fabric and the batting shrink up together and you get that lovely thing, when you have a polyester batting in there and the fabric is shrinking around it, it gets really kind of ugly. It gets uneven and lumpy and not what you want. So if you do really want to use a polyester batting, go ahead and just pre-wash your fabric and use a polyester batting in there. My favorite is cotton because my fabric's all 100% cotton, and that way I know that they're going to wash the same way and dry the same way, and it just feels good to me that it's traditional, and you can get organic cotton, you can get, cotton batting that's cream colored or bleached white or black or gray. And of course, you're going to want a dark batting if you have a dark quilt. If you put a dark batting under this cream, it would look awful. And another thing, if you had a very, very thin batting under this white, under this cream, and you had a very striking backing fabric, the backing fabric can actually sort of show through if there's any light behind the quilt. So just kind of keep that in mind. Bamboo is gorgeous. It's soft and lovely and cool, but warm. You know, it's light. Silk is, well, of course, who doesn't love silk? And a silk bat is gorgeous. It's so soft. So if you're making a really huge quilt, like a California queen size quilt, if you can put a silk batting in there, you'll get the warmth, but you won't have that oppressive weight. So you're going to pick your batting out. And again, as I said, machine quilters have their own battings that they like and don't like. And many machine quilters will provide the batting for you, and actually prefer to, because they can buy batting on a roll, and then it can just roll right through the layers of the quilt top and the backing. So make sure you talk to your quilter about that before you go over there and bring your batting with you. And then your backing can be anything you want it to be, as long as the fiber content is the same as your top. So don't use a sheet. Don't use a sheet. Don't use a sheet for your backing. A sheet usually has a higher thread count, and more to the point, it's woven so tightly that it's not going to wash at all like your top. And again, you're going to have where the top shrinks in, but the back, it kind of does this curl. Don't use a sheet. It's not worth it. You can, of course, use your scraps. You can sew them together and make a pieced backing, as long as your machine quilter is okay with quilting on one. Some people won't do it. If you do decide to make a pieced backing, I strongly recommend that between all the seams, at the beginning and the end of every little seam, just do a little back stitch, because that backing, you don't want it to pull apart at all when it's, especially when it's being pulled in the machine, getting ready to sew all the layers together. So another thing, if you're picking a backing fabric that's directional, it has an up and a down, decide which orientation you want it in on the back of your quilt. Where is up to you? And make sure that you have that information supplied to your machine quilter so she orients it the right way in the machine, so you get the up that you want. Another thing, when you are piecing a backing, let's say that you have a quilt that is 60 inches wide. Well, quilting fabric, we usually figure, for sure 40 usable inches. Okay, so that means you're going to have a vertical seam, usually. You could have a horizontal seam, and a square quilt, it won't matter. But you're going to have a seam. You have a 40-inch piece of fabric, and you have a 20-inch piece of fabric. Well, if you just make one seam, you're going to have this one seam that's offset, that's to the side. And if that's going to bother you because you don't like things that are asymmetrical, instead of sewing it like that, what you can do, you can cut that 40-inch strip in the middle, and then have two seams. It's kind of silly because you feel like you're sewing it back together onto itself. Just move it, offset it with that other strip. But then you'll have two seams that you can center, that will be symmetrical. And the same thing happens. Let's say your quilt is 90 inches wide. Well, the two widths of fabric would be 80. So you need another 10 inches. I would either put one 10-inch strip down the center and put 40 and 40. Or I would do the 240 side by side and do 5 inches on either side. Now, that's up to you. But do plan how you want to piece that backing, okay? And then the last step is binding. And in this quilt, this is your glorious binding right here. And I know I forgot to show you the selvage last time. I am sorry. Here we go. This is the Northcott Toscana solids. Look at that. Wow. I hope you can see. It's almost like a twill tape. It's that dense, which tells you how incredibly dense and fine. It's very fine fabric, very beautiful, solid, and lovely hand, and it's just the best solid I've ever seen. And no, Northcott is not paying me anything. Okay, this is just me. So this is going to be your binding fabric, and you'll make binding however you wish to make it. Everybody has their own ways. And it's just gorgeous. And one last thing, I will tell you this. If you take your quilt top to your machine quilter and you give it to her and it's not squared, she might say, oops, you need to square this. Or she might wait until you leave and then go, and be very sad and have to do it herself. But just so you know, now you'd have the big border on the outside, but if you want to square your quilt to make sure that it's going to work well in her machine and look square when you're done, the bigger the ruler, the easier it is. And you just align it with the corner like that. You line it with right along. You can even put, like for instance, on this little 2-inch border, you put on the 2¼ inch line. And just see, is it square? Is it reasonably square? Little ins and outs don't matter, okay? Because, that'll be gone when you get it back. But if you have something that is sticking out, let's say, I'll have to fake it. Okay, I'm gonna pull this in, so it's kind of weird. There, okay. Now, if I have it where it's really strange, and I have this big chunk of fabric out here, so it's really hard to do this. It's like if you know how to sing, try singing off key. It's impossible. Okay, so if you have something sticking way out like that, you're gonna have to make a decision. If you just lop that off, you're gonna have a border that looks too narrow and could be really strange. What you may opt to do is come in and see if this is square. And if it's not, what you might do is unsew along here and here and just trim that up a little bit to make this nice and square, and then sew them back on. It's worth doing, because otherwise, if you're like me, you're gonna see that odd area forever. You're gonna see where that border got narrower, okay? So I think that's it. I think I've told you everything you need to know. Oh, I will give you one more tip. Okay, I have a friend who is a most gloriously wonderful person, but she doesn't always think ahead, and she doesn't always think things through. So I will tell you this. It's, first of all, it's a really good thing to do. You want to iron your quilt top as well as you possibly can once you've got it all put together before it goes to the quilter, because it really makes a quilt top look great, and it also makes it easier for the quilter to really have it in her machine properly. So you want to give it the best pressing you possibly can before you take it to your quilter. However, do not lay your quilt top on your carpet, no matter how well you've vacuumed it, and iron it there so you can do this huge big thing kind of at once. Because the majority of carpets nowadays have polyester in them, or nylon. Either way, it's not cotton, and it's not going to stand up to the heat of your iron. And my friend melted her carpet, and she didn't know she did it until she'd done the whole thing. And it fused into this horrible crunchy mess. And if you smell something weird when you're ironing, always check it out. Anyway, she didn't. So if you want to iron your quilt top on your carpet, make sure you have a 100% cotton carpet. I don't even know if you can get them, but there's my tip for you. So I hope you had a good time with me. I loved doing this quilt along. Some of them are just really special, and this one was. And again, this is the Northcott Charlotte collection, these beautiful florals and little prints, and it's the Toscana collection of those solids. And if you didn't get your kit, you can go to mccallsquilting.com/quiltalong and get one there. And I want to thank you for joining me, and I just hope you had such a good time. It's a wonderful quilt, and beautiful and feminine, and it's a pleasure to sew. So thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoy quilting for years and years and years and years and never stop.